What time is it?
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Recyc Search podcast. Today we are going to be starting off episode 1 with a topic that I find kind of interesting, but I don't know if anyone else will. Intellectual property! Yay! So I found an interesting paper called "To Promote the Creative Process, Intellectual Property Law, and the Psychology of Creativity" by Gregory Mandel. The way the paper was written made it seem like there were certain types of intellectual law and the way that it was used in the creative process, or how different people who are creative use the idea of intellectual property to influence them in different sorts of ways, which can either increase or decrease their creativity. So the paper starts off kind of defining some parameters around what it will be looking at. The things the paper looked at were motivation, collaboration, and convergent versus divergent thought processes. The way the paper started is it started by kind of defining and operationalizing most of the terms. So it first of all said that creativity is utilized when in the production of something that is both novel and appropriate. And it defined novel as being something that was original, and appropriate as being something that had recognized as socially useful or valuable in some way to a community. For the purposes of the paper, I understand why they kind of defined it like this, because it's hard to define something that is, creativity, considering it's so subjective, and also there's not really a tangible thing. So defining it as something that can be the product, like something that is used in order to create a product that is a tangible thing, makes a lot of sense. Although for their definition of appropriateness, I don't know if creativity necessarily needs to be something that has any sort of social utility to it. For instance, there is a lot of art that has quite literally no social utility to it. It could just be something that an artist created in their basement that never really gets to see the rest of the world, or just stays with them because it's something personal to themselves. I would say that if somebody creates a piece of art that's unique and original to them, even if it doesn't have any social utility, that would still utilize creativity in making that art. But for the purposes of the paper, kind of defining it as this makes sense insofar as you can easily look at the effects of it when judging those effects based off of intellectual property laws. So even if I don't necessarily agree that it's a perfect definition, I see why they used it in this context. There's also mention of different types of processes of thinking that artists will use in order to create something creative, or anyone for that matter, which are divergent and convergent. Divergent thought typically consists of more abstract concepts, while convergent thought is more inside of the box, kind of logistical or logical thinking. In order to be creative, or produce something that's creative, you're going to need a mix of both of these, right? You would think that artists or making something creative would have more divergent thought processes in it, but even an artist, when it comes to making an art, you have the idea for what you want the art to be like, but the actual process of getting there is going to take more convergent thinking, whereas the idea and the outcome, the thought that goes into actually creating it, is going to be more divergent. For instance, a musician, when it comes to making a piece of music, they can come up with an idea for what they want it to sound like, and that would kind of be done through divergent processing, but convergent would essentially be how you get there, figuring out what notes you play on your instrument or what notes you sing in order to make the piece of music that you want. So now that all of those definitions are out there, we can kind of get into the meat of the paper, which, as I said earlier, is copyright law. So the paper wanted to mention specifically that there is a connection between copyright law and motivation. Specifically, it distinguishes between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation when involved in copyright law. And it defines them essentially as extrinsic motivation is something that there is for those of you who don't know, some extrinsic reward, as in you do a behavior and you get a reward from it, whereas intrinsic behavior, you're just doing the behavior because of your own intrinsic values, because of your own wants and desires. We've seen prior research show that intrinsic motivation typically leads to something, a final product, that will be more creative than being motivated by something that was extrinsically motivated. In many instances, when somebody is trying to create something, in a legal sense, they're going to try to get a patent for it. And as such, the patent gives them intellectual ownership over the thing that they made, whether that be a concept, a piece of art, or music, or something else. The paper points out that other research has been done which shows that extrinsic motivators can also create intrinsic motivation within people to create something new, which, when you think about it, makes a lot of sense, right? Let's say you have somebody who has an idea to create something, but they're not really sure how to go about it. What they can end up doing is, if they can figure out a way to sustain themselves from the product that they have or whatever the idea is that they're making. For instance, an artist coming out with a piece of art. The artist can still be motivated intrinsically to create the piece of art, but if they can set up a structure which would allow them to sell the art afterwards, they can be actually extrinsically motivated to do it, which would in turn give them the ability to create the thing which they were already intrinsically motivated to do. The paper then tries to utilize this idea to say in kind of a way that things like patents or copyrights can actually give people more intrinsic motivation, which is kind of true. The paper suggests that some people might be creating an intrinsic motivation in order to get the patent, as if the patent was the motivation intrinsically to kind of set their own goal for themselves. I thought this was kind of funny, considering directly after the paper mentions this, it kind of double backs and points out that in order to actually get a patent, at least in the United States, there's a very low bar to reach in terms of creativity necessary in order to attain a patent. So it seems to me that there's already some level of intrinsic motivation that someone had, and then they gain more intrinsic motivation when there's extrinsic motivation, which leads to the ability to actually create the thing they were already intrinsically motivated to create. At least, that's my guess, not having gone through the works that he cited in his paper. This leads the author to their next point, which is about collaboration and creativity. So, he states that there's been multiple types of research that have shown that increasing collaboration on a project will lead to the project having more creative outcomes. That makes sense when you think about it. I mean, the more people you have working on a project, the more brains are better than one. You're going to get people with different backgrounds and a lot of different fields of subjects that they're going to be coming into this with. they're going to have different ideas or make different connections than just one person was with their one background. Which, all of that makes sense. I mean, I feel like most people have come to the idea that diversity of thought is generally a good thing. However, when it comes to the legal system, this isn't necessarily the case. It's actually very difficult in order for multiple people to have a copyright or patent over something. Specifically, in order to do that, both people need to be working with each other and have joint intentions to be co-owners of the thing they're creating, in addition to having contributed something which would be equally patentable individually in order to both have a patent over something. You might think that it's a little odd that the law is kind of put in place to make it harder for people to co-own a project, even though collaboration actually makes it better for people to come up with more creative ideas and solutions to things. However, when you stop to think about why these laws were put in place and what contributing factors were put into there, it makes sense that large corporations, likely lobbying the government, probably have a stake in intellectual property rights and it pertaining to them, so the law likely came out in their favor. For instance, this led to a lot of corporations essentially just saying that as a part of contracts with their workers, that whatever the workers make will inevitably be owned by the corporation. I'd also like to mention in those types of settings, back to the whole intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, most of those people who are working for businesses that are trying to create something, either be it a movie or a TV show or something, are primarily going to be extrinsically motivated, just judging by, they're doing this job specifically because they're getting paid to do it by their employer. However, that isn't always going to be true. For instance, there's certain types of actors who get paid ludicrous amounts of money for working on projects and movies. I'm just thinking about Jack Black. He's an interesting example because there's going to be a lot of actors like him who specifically pick out what roles and what movies they want to be a part of, not because of the money that is involved with the production of it or how much they're going to get from it, just because they pick the roles based off of how much fun they think they're going to have doing them. So in those type of instances, that's going to be mainly intrinsic motivation, helping them to create the role for that. But for a lot of other people, specifically people editing those projects or maybe smaller crew members who just got on their first gig, are just doing it to make a name for themselves and are doing whatever it is they're doing because of the extrinsic motivations. Might also be why sometimes you're going to get much smaller scale creators who aren't looking to get, anything monetary from their content, who are just doing it for their own reasons, that are going to give out better content given enough training and experience than somebody who would be looking for money. Cough, cough, hit that like and subscribe button on the video. I know you're still watching. Just trust me, we're only getting better from here. But we're getting to that point in the video, so I should just let you all know the citation is in the description of the video, and honestly, go give it a read for a couple reasons. A, because I actually think it's kind of interesting, and if you're interested enough to watch the video, you should definitely give this article a read. It gives it gives more descriptions than I do, and it probably gives it in both more complicated and probably more specific terms that are likely more accurate. Not to say that I necessarily did anything or said anything incorrect, but I definitely am not an expert on this field, so listening to experts' opinions can give you a more well-rounded explanation. And hey, if I did mess something up, leave a comment and let me know. For the next episode I'm planning, considering the 4th of July is going to be coming up soon, I'm going to see if I can get something a little bit more American, and then we'll see what happens. But hey, we are only going uphill from here. Alright guys, have a good one.